This podcast may contain graphic and/or explicit content that may not be suitable for some listeners, especially kids like me. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to the Real Life Podcast, brought to you by the Thin Blue Line for Women. In this podcast, we open up and talk about real life issues as they relate to first responders. It's raw, it's real, and it's about time. I'm Tamara, your host. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget, you can listen to the Real Life Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Casts, and on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Before we start this episode, I have some very important people to thank. These are the sponsors of my podcast, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart because the money that you give every month goes directly to pay for the podcast program that I use to record the guests. So thank you, Cammie, Anne, Lori, Susan, Ron, Ben, Katie, Paul, and Kathleen. I super appreciate your support. In this episode, Nick and I have an open and very candid conversation about the cumulative stress he endured as a police officer and how it led to his current life situation, which he'll tell you all about. He discusses his constant struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and talks about his upcoming book titled Invisible Wounds: A Cop's Journey of Faith Through the Darkness of PTSD. So this podcast episode is actually titled after his book. So here's my interview with Nicholas Anthony, A Cop's Journey of Faith Through the Darkness of PTSD. Thank you for joining me. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. So Nick, you were a police officer. Tell me a little bit about yourself and tell the listeners about yourself before we get into talking about some post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, so I became a police officer after college, actually. My senior year in college, I started applying to different police departments in the last semester. And by the time I graduated, I had already had a job lined up. And I was supposed to go to the academy that summer. So that was 2007. And I turned 22 in the academy. So, I got hired at a relatively young age. But, I was excited, at the time to start my career and, be so young and already have a job. At the same time, I was in the National Guard. I got commissioned when I graduated as an officer in the Army, commissioned officer. I was a second lieutenant. So I had that going on too at the same time. So I belonged to a military police unit that, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year that I would drill with. And then I needed a permanent job. So that's why I started looking for, hey, what's the best thing that matches police and military life? And that's where I was like, yeah, I might as well become a cop. So it was kind of one of those things where, when I had gone through college and I did the ROTC program in college to become an officer in the Army, my intention was to originally go full-time active duty as an Army officer.
Mm-hmm.
And, I ended up getting offered a scholarship for the National Guard. Sometimes the National Guards will offer in a certain state a scholarship to try to pull officers that are going to be graduating into them versus going active duty. And it was tempting because they were essentially going to pay for the last 2 years of college. So I was like, okay. And, I took that route, but I was like, now I need a job permanently. So that's where I kind of got into the police thing.
Well, thank you for your service. I did not know that about you. I was in the security police in the Air Force.
Oh, there you go.
I know they call it MP in the Army and the Marines, right? And the
Yes,
Air Force,
MP.
they call security. Yeah,
Yep.
security police. That's awesome.
Multi-purpose, MP.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for your service because I did not know that about you. So you became an officer in 2007.
Yep.
And what kind of jobs did you do as an officer?
On the police department you're talking
On
about,
the
right?
police department.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So initially I was patrol, and after I got off FTO and all that, I was assigned to second shift, which is most of the time you go to midnights, but I was thrown right
Right.
into the fire. And I made a lot of mistakes, I'm sure, because I didn't have a lot of time to adjust. But as years went down the line, I'd always been interested in firearms, and I've always been a good shot. And being from the military and running ranges in the military as an officer and a range officer of the military, I eventually became a firearms instructor at my department, which was like a dream come true for me. I got to go a week, 2 week school for that, and it was an awesome, excellent school. It was actually the Smith and Wesson Academy I went to, and got
Wow.
trained as law enforcement firearms instructor. It was great. They did rifle, shotgun, handgun, everything. Off duties, night shooting, and it was probably to this day I'd say one of the best trainings I've been to. And I
Well,
did
tell the thieves not to break in your house.
right. And it was funny because at the time when they put out the position of firearms instructor, initially they were like, "Hey, we're looking for firearms instructors," was the email, and I just put in for rifle at the time, and they said they were looking for armors, this, that. But what they decided to do was, "Oh, congratulations, you got everything. So you're going to be a pistol, handgun, rifle, shotgun instructor, and an armorer in all those things." So
Wow.
they ended up sending me and two other guys to, the three of us got selected, and they sent us
Wow.
all to a bunch of schools all at once. Like that whole year, I was going from like armorer school to firearm instructor school. So,
Right.
but I mean, it was good. I mean, it was a lot of, um, I was out of everybody, I was the only person that didn't have rank. So there was a lieutenant that got selected with me, and a sergeant, and there was little old me, just the officer. But so it was always an interesting dynamic,
I
especially
bet.
when
I bet.
we went away one time for a training, and the department stuck the three of us in one hotel room because
Ugh.
they didn't want to pay for separate hotel
Of
rooms.
course not. Come on.
So who do you think didn't get a bed? Because there was two
Right.
queen beds in the hotel room, and I ended up sleeping on a cot
Right.
because I'm the officer, and there. So, but it was awful because I remember one guy was watching. He had training day on till like 2 a.m. in the morning, and blasting on the TV, and then the other
Oh.
guy was snoring. So I literally wanted to, I was shoving toilet paper in my ears. Like I felt like the guys in the prison cell, like, because we used to see that at work. Like when guys couldn't sleep, like they would take toilet paper and shove them in
Yeah.
their ears in the cell
Yeah.
block. So it was funny because one of the guys the next morning was just dying because he's like took a picture of me. I was wrapping the blanket on my head, and so it was
Didn't it bring you back to the basic training? Because
oh
you were
yeah, it
all
was
on cots in the same room.
yeah, and it was just very I don't know, and it
Uh,
was funny because the next morning we was a multiple day school. We ended up calling the department, and like one of the sergeants was like, "You can't do that again to us," to the administrative person at the department. Like you gotta you gotta get us a separate room, or we're gonna buy it ourselves because you're putting three grown men in a room together. This is ridiculous. So the next day, I actually got the room by myself the next day, which was nice.
Nice.
So
Heck yeah.
they only granted us one extra room, but
Wow.
and I was like, nope. I'm like, it's mine. I'm like, I slept on the cot last night. So
Oh my gosh. So, okay, so you're on it 2007 and you're a firearms instructor. And what else did you do? Is there anything else
so
other
yeah,
than
so
patrol?
in the armor stuff, but one of the big things I was known for. So I don't know what year it was, but we went on a call one year, and this guy had armed himself with a rifle, and the call was supposedly, the dispatcher had talked the woman out of the house. It was a relative. I don't know if it was a wife or whatever, because he was it started as a domestic, and then he told her he was going to kill her, and then he said, if you call the police, there's going to be a bloodbath. I'm going to kill all the cops. So the dispatcher had her, it was at night, run across the street. There was a fire station like 2 blocks down, and he said, run to the fire station and meet the firemen there and stay out of the house, and the police are going to deal with it. So she's like, he's a hunter, he's got an infrared scope, and for people that don't know what that is, that you can see heat signatures, like you're hunting deer. Like, I compare it to Predator,
Yeah.
So you're right. The movie Predator, where it can see at night. So we're getting ready to go, and it was me, another kid I went to the academy with, a sergeant at the time, and one other kid. And 2 of us were only in the military. It was me and my other buddy that I went to the academy with, that both served in the military. And we're getting ready to go gear up, and at the time we had just started getting rifles, and, you were allowed to have your own rifle. I had my own rifle. So we're getting our rifles and we're gearing up, and, my buddy looks at me and goes, shouldn't we have a medical kit? He's like, I mean, we're going to be like out there by ourselves. If this guy starts opening fire, like, what, and in the Army, you train to patch up gunshot wounds and do all that stuff. And it became even better. Like, since, Iraq and Afghanistan, now they've expanded so much upon tactical trauma training and medical training. But in the police world, it was non-existent at the time. This was before a lot of the active shooters started kicking off, and this stuff. So after that call, it ended peacefully. We ended up going into the woods from behind the house, and we came out, and we actually had the guy come out of the window of the kitchen in the backyard, and we pulled him out. But like the whole time, I'm thinking, walking through the woods, like, this guy's watching us, like our little our heat signatures running across the yard, and he's going to be picking us off. So when we opened the trunk, the medical kit in the back of the trunk was literally like a patch of gauze, some tape and Band-Aids. Like, it was, if you were going to get shot by a high-powered hunting rifle, it wasn't going to do anything. So after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it my mission. And I actually went to the department, was like, hey, I want to get, like, I found a class. At the time, it was Officer Down Rescue Instructor was the name of it. And it did officer down tactics and tourniquets and blood clotting agents like Quick Clot and things like that. And you'd be instructor certified. So they were like, no, we don't need that. We have rescue people. Like, they just didn't understand the concept. And I was like, well, the rescue's not going to come in if rounds are being, flying over the head. So I ended up paying, at the time, it was $800 of my own money to go and get certified. Wow. But I'm glad I did it, because it was a great training, and I ended up, after I did it, I came back and I was like, hey, like, I paid myself. I want to train the department now. And they were like, of course, budget issues. Well, you can train them, but just do it during roll call. And I was like, one of those, and, roll call trainings. I mean, who's half paying attention, who's eating, or, even depending on the supervisor. And some people don't want to be bothered, or, so I did. I had some guys, we would go out in the back lot, and we did some, drills, or real quick, but then the calls come in, you don't have time, and it's not an adequate training. So for years, I had begged for, like, give me a block of time to train. We do all this training, and we had like 4 hours one day for electric vehicle training from, like, the fire department on hybrid vehicles. That has nothing really to do with us, other than after 4 hours, the one thing I took away with it was, don't touch any electric wires in an electric vehicle in a car accident. So like, they could have summed that up in a sentence for a police officer, because we're not the ones doing all that, but yet they wouldn't give something to this. So
interesting.
They ended up, I put in for a tactical emergency medical specialist by the same company was running this training. And it was a week-long, 40-hour block of basically like a SWAT medic training. So I said, hey, can I go to it? I put in for it again. This time they said yes, because they felt like they owed me because of what happened. So that kind of became my thing at the department. Everybody knew me as the tactical medical guy. Like, I ended up getting kits for us. I ended up getting tourniquets. And later they did, and the state was running a Stop the Bleed program, the National Stop the Bleed. So I ended up getting certified as a Stop the Bleed train the trainer, which Stop the Bleed's more of, like, it's less of the tactical aspect of it, more of the medical, and you can train civilians too. So, we did an active shooter training one day, because I'm an active shooter instructor too. through FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy Center, and they have a great active shooter instructor program. So we did get to I put together an active shooter instructor training for a whole week, had the guys rotating out. At the time, we did Stop the Bleed. We issued them little kits with Quick Clot and things like that. And so, I mean, I feel like to some extent, like I was able to make a difference. And it's funny because one of the officers we did tourniquet training probably a year before that in like one of the ranges. So during, because that's how things are with budget is, hey, we don't have time to do a separate tactical medical training on tourniquets. Why don't you integrate that into the range while you guys do range week? So we did. I went over tourniquets one day at the range and I explained them just in like a roundabout. We all circled around, before we started shooting, and I explained the tourniquet, how to put it on, where to put it, the proper use of it, etc. Well, like a month later, an officer is driving home from work and sees a car accident on the highway, and a guy is ejected out of the vehicle.
Oh gosh!
Down the side of the ramp, lost his leg, and the officer had went out and purchased his own tourniquet.
Wow.
And went and applied the tourniquet on the guy's leg. And at the time, doesn't tell anybody at the department he did this. So nobody knew about it. So he had come up to me like right after it happened. He was like, hey, he's like, I want to tell you something. He's like, I used your training the other day and I used my tourniquet. Like some guy witnessed a car accident and the guy's leg was off. And I'm like, I go, did you like tell anybody about that? He's like, no, I didn't tell anybody. I'm like, well, you probably should, like, that you did all that. Well, the media got a hold of it, and eventually the story came out, and the kid was awarded because he did. I mean, he was a hero,
Wow, that's awesome.
and he got to save the life. And even though I didn't, but if I didn't train him in that, you know what I mean? So I don't want any of the credit for it. I just want, I'm glad that one thing can make a difference.
Right.
And that just goes to
Absolutely.
show you that, years ago, they didn't want to hear this. They didn't want, what are tourniquets? We don't need that, so, and we've come a long way now that I've yet to find a cop out there now that, the other day I was in here and I saw a cop, somebody had a tourniquet on his belt, and I used to carry one on my belt.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that it's becoming a national thing, but I feel like I was on the forefront of a lot of that, especially in my department, trying to push that. And I ended up even, I said to the chief one day at the time, I was like, hey, like, can I go to the schools? Because we were doing the Alice program too in the schools. Are you familiar with Alice?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And, I was part of the Alice.
For the people listening, tell them what Alice is because they don't know.
Right. So Alice is an active shooter response, but it's on the civilian level. So for school teachers, for example, if there is an active shooter, instead of just locking down, which is the traditional response for active shooter, they still want you to do that, but only if you have exhausted other options and you can't escape. So basically, the way Alice works, to sum it up, is it's options. It's, and the first drill that they do in Alice training is, just to set the example so people understand, is they have you locked down like you normally do. They have all the teachers get the students and go cuddle, hide in a corner. And then the person who acts as the shooter during the first scenario comes in, makes entry into the classroom, and now goes up to where everybody's huddled and starts going pop, pop, pop with an air gun or whatever. And right after that, the teachers, they'll get pulled aside and be like, how did that work? And they're like, I felt like a sitting duck. So what Alice does is it gives them another option. If you think someone's coming into the room, barricade the doors with chairs, or, throw items at the intruder if he comes in, or if you can get out, get out. If you think the shooter is, you can tell maybe they're on the other side of the school, maybe we can communicate somehow, or to have everybody leave the other end of the building, so the biggest thing was I wasn't an Alice instructor, but I was on the Alice team because I was a firearms instructor. So I was the guy who's usually the guy with the rifle blasting off blank rounds in the training, because that's how we did it to make it real for the teachers. Like I would go in there, and my buddy was one of the head Alice instructors. So he would, every time I would do it, he would like, hey, can you grab an AR? And I would get, the AR-15 with the blank firing adapter, and I would order blanks, and we would do the drill. So the teachers hear what a real gunshot sounds like. They smell the gunpowder in the air, and it's just a great experience for them. And they can hear it. Like we would go down the hall, and I would have the rifle, and I would start shooting from down the hall so they could hear the difference of the as it gets closer. So, you know, I think part of that was I said to the chief was all on board with Alice. So I was like, and while we were doing these trainings, a lot of teachers would ask, well, what happens if we do get shot, or what happens? How do we take care of each other? And I was like, and as an instructor in that, I'm like, well, there are things you can do. And at the time I was like, you can go online, there's websites, Stop the Bleed, and, learn these things. And there's kits out there to buy these things. Because the reality of it is these teachers today, a lot of them feel like they're helpless. And in this scenario, they want to do whatever they can to defend themselves and defend the children,
Mm-hmm.
So I had said to the, chief, I said, look, do you mind if am I allowed to train some teachers? So he said, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it would be good PR. And I did, I started with, it was a Catholic school, small Catholic school, but, like a K-8. And the nurse at the school, she actually was all about it, like just was 100% wanted to do it. And her and I worked together, and I trained all the teachers, all the staff there, and I showed them all the equipment, and, and they loved it. And she ended up getting a donation from a bunch of, like churchgoers, because it was a Catholic school, a bunch of, she called them the church lady group or whatever they were. They were like a group of
Yeah.
women that met from the church, and they decided to donate money. And she came to me and was like, hey, we got donated money. She's like, can we order some kits? Show me what to order. And I ended up getting the trauma. They're actually wall mounted trauma kits from some of these companies. So it mounts just like you would see an AED, a defibrillator on the wall of a school. Now, next to that would be a wall mounted trauma thing with a clear plastic case, and you'd open it and there would be, X amount of trauma kits in there to handle gunshot wounds. It's sad that we have to say that that's something that
I was just going to say that.
need to be in a school,
Right.
but it's also sad that we do Alice and things like that in lockdown. I mean, I remember the first time I went to a real lockdown. We had an accidental lockdown. Sometimes it happens because the teachers have the buttons and stuff, certain ones, and accidentally was hit, and nobody knew they couldn't figure out. It was taking a while to find out which button was triggered. So we had to treat it like a real scenario.
Right.
So we were going in and we're going through these buildings, and it was the first time I actually saw a lockdown. And we ended up opening a door that was open, and I went in the classroom, and we scared the teachers and the children, even though we were cops. But here these kids were all huddled together, like, and
So
it just
innocent.
right. And now that I have a 5-year-old that is, she was in preschool this year, and she's going into kindergarten, and they've done the schools now tell you when they do the drills with lockdown, and they try to. It's just sad, and it's scary.
It
It
is.
it breaks my heart that these kids don't understand why they're doing this, and
Right.
but I mean, I ended up training that school, and then the public school was an issue more so because with public schools, private schools can do whatever they want, but public schools you have to go through, the superintendent and things like that. But I had a principal reach out to me from that I was friendly with, because that school was the middle school. It was in my area, so even though I wasn't a school officer, I was there all the time, and I had a good working relationship with the principal and the assistant principal. And he wanted to do the training. So he's like, look, Nick, like, I can only do it. I can't force these teachers to do it because it's a union issue with the school and the teachers union, because I can't pay them. If they want to do it, it has to be voluntary. So he offered it, and 30 people actually, but the school has 100 and something teachers, but 30 teachers volunteered to spend time after school on like an administrative day and go through the training, so it's just, they're still making way out there, and a lot of this stuff has to come down from the state levels to be mandated. And where I was from in Rhode Island, where I worked, they're not there yet, unfortunately. But I think eventually we'll see that. So
your resume is impeccable. I mean, you've just listed all of these wonderful things that you've done, and you've trained in so much. I can't believe it. I had no idea. My gosh. Well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to dive into the incident. Um, I'm going to say, I guess, that just changed your life. It changed your career. So we'll be right
Yeah,
back.
absolutely. Okay.
No, but we'll be right back. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. And there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm. Are you interested in CSI or forensics? The Forensic Science Academy program has been recognized as the premier training program completely dedicated to students who are launching their forensic career. The Academy offers specialized hands-on training modules in basic and advanced crime scene investigation, forensic photography, fingerprint identification and classification, crime scene management, and coroner investigations. Instruction is offered in the form of weekend workshops, online courses, webinars, and seminars. Training at the Academy of Forensic Science will give students the competitive edge employers and agencies are looking for when hiring. Past graduates are now working as crime scene investigators, private investigators, forensic pathologists, coroner investigators, forensic nurses, forensic accountants, and even criminalists. The courses are taught by forensic professionals who are experts in the field and hold membership in the International Association for Identification and other professional forensic organizations. For more information, visit forensicscienceacademy.org. Again, that's forensicscienceacademy.org. All right, welcome back from break. Now, Nick, after we've just went over your extensive resume, you are not working right now as an officer, correct?
Correct.
You're employed, but you're
technically still, I'm on the department still right now. I'm just not, I've been on unpaid leave since I expended all my personal time in October.
Okay. Tell me and the listeners why.
So, last year was a difficult year for me. I was, this time actually last year, I had I would call it a breakdown, I guess, at work. And I was having a lot of physical symptoms, eye issues. I was having headaches. And it just seemed like a lot of it was related to going into when I was heading into work. Like every morning I was getting out of my car in my back lot at the police station and walking in, I would get sudden sharp pains in my head and just, I didn't know what was going on. But to backtrack a little bit that year, so right before that happened, a few months before, I had some sudden death calls, and we call sudden deaths at work. That's when you have to go. I don't think people realize, when every time someone passes away in a public place or in their home, that the police have to respond.
Mm-hmm, right.
So
to make sure that it's not foul play.
Right. And you know more than anybody as, a CSI person, there has to be an investigation and just, and a lot of times it's nothing, but now with drugs and, suicides, and you do see all that stuff. And, for 12 years, you can imagine I've seen, there's tons of it that I've seen. And even the regular ones were starting to bother me, the ones that I had a lot of issue too with, I think if you talk to some cops, sometimes you'll hear the similar thing that's echoed is when an old person passes, you tend to be able to justify it because they were elderly. It was their time, and then what I started doing was justifying other things okay, well, this person died of a heart attack. It was their fault because they didn't take care of themselves, or they were obese, or this person overdosed because, it's their fault, or this person died in a car accident because they were driving too fast, maybe, or they were reckless. So I found myself worried about death, and having children now, things get worse, I feel like, because now you're not just worried about yourself.
Right.
you're worried about your kids.
Uh-huh.
And,
Oh yeah.
you're like, I see people die sometimes, and you're like, could that be me? Like, what if I died and my kids don't have a father now? And,
Mm-hmm.
these were fears that were consuming me,
Mm-hmm.
literally, and making me physically ill.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got physically ill with the headaches and things like that, all the more that it plays off as, okay, I'm having bad headaches now. Am I going to be that person that dropped dead in the middle of the supermarket with an aneurysm that I've
Right.
seen? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it became an unhealthy fear and unhealthy just in everything. And I wasn't making the connection initially what was going on. Now I do know about 2016 I went on a call, and that was like the breaking point for me. And it was a young man he was in a vehicle, and he ended up it was, I ruled it a suicide as my investigation, but we weren't sure. It was a carbon monoxide poisoning, and we weren't sure if it was intentional, accidental, but he was so young. Like, I'm talking like in his early 20s, I don't even remember, but just someone that had so much youth in him that he shouldn't have been
Mhm.
gone.
Yeah.
And he had such a following of friends in town, and he was a little likable guy, and I just, for some reason, I could not look at him in the vehicle. I couldn't do it. And I don't know if it was a defense thing or what, but like after that, just everything changed. And that was 2016. And of
Do
course
you,
I went up. Go
do
ahead.
you mean
Sorry.
do you mean you couldn't look at his face?
Not only his face, but just the scene, like, so I'm there and I'm outside the garage, but I'm avoiding actually looking into the driver compartment of the car and seeing
Okay.
his face and seeing.
But you have to take notes for your report. So how did that work?
So I was able to kind of look, and I knew he was laying down in the vehicle. So I looked, I saw he was laying down, and he was in there. So I was able to kind of word it as, and our department, we have CSI too. So
Mhm.
we call him BCI. So our BCI officer comes out, and he's going to process the scene anyway. So I wasn't too worried about
Gotcha.
what I don't, see. And most of the time on some of these other calls, the medical examiner comes out too. So
Mhm.
our BCI and medical examiner from the state will work together, and they'll do it, and I've been on calls before where I've had to physically, roll the person over or check for, all the things that we look and check for, and, for signs of death. And, but again, that's not my specialty. It's just something we're basic
Mhm.
trained in as a police
Yeah.
officer.
What's BCI? I don't know what that is.
So in, I think it's like basic crime scene investigation, or I believe it
Oh,
stands
basic
for.
crime investigator, maybe. Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
And
Sorry about
they
that.
go in Rhode Island, they go to school for it to get certified like police to go, and then
Okay.
in our department, they would end up on a call out list. So
Okay.
we had
Gotcha.
multiple different BCI people that would get
Wow.
called out on a
Okay.
rotating list, and they would go on these scenes. So I did the best I could. I went and I documented the scene. Otherwise, there was other things, and I documented the text messages that were being sent between him and his, and back and forth and different things. And,
Mhm.
you know, um, I just felt like at the time, like it looked, and then the family showed up, and like I had never, family always shows up on some of these scenes sometimes, and
Mhm.
that's another
Mhm.
issue that you deal with as
Oh
a
yeah.
cop is grieving family members, angry family members,
Mhm.
physically angry family members that want to get by you to see the person, don't
Yeah.
believe
Right.
you, they're accusing
Right.
you of lying, all these things that are natural with
Yeah.
death.
Yeah.
This individual, literally like 30 people showed up on scene. Like that's how
Wow.
popular he was. Like
Wow.
there were cars pulling up, and like the lawn was filled with people, and like that just made
How
it so much.
did he send a text to everybody saying he was gonna do this or something? How did they all know he was there?
No, the friend found him. So
Oh,
a
so that
friend
friend
found him. I think that
started
friend,
the chain.
maybe, but
Mm.
so now I've got all these family members there, all these friends, and like I'm starting to get upset because you know it's hard, and I was getting to the point where I couldn't. Their trauma became my trauma.
Oh,
Like
yeah, right.
even though,
Compassion
and
fatigue.
yeah, and the thing is, like my family, like I would talk to my parents about, like, sometimes I always talk to my mom on the way home from work sometimes just to vent. And I would be like, and she would be like, well, that's not your relative. But I'm like, you don't understand. Like, when you're in these positions, like,
Mm-hmm.
I get it, but you can't help but relate to these people,
Right. Yeah.
and start to feel sad. And after a while, it's like, how much trauma and tragedy am I going to see, and not worry that when is it my turn,
Mm-hmm.
And I just got tired of seeing it. And things got from that point on, things really got worse. I mean, years before that, I had, we used to meet up as officers side by side. We used to call it a 1036, like, talking.
We call it 940.
Right. So, one day I'm 36 and with this officer, and this was even years before 2016. And I said to him, like, I was talking about, must have just gone on a sudden death call. And I was like, man, like, these, I can't, they really weigh on me. I'm like, I just feel so bad. And he's like, oh, really? He's like, I didn't know you felt that way. Like, he's like, oh, like, and I just, again, you carry on and you do your job because it hasn't reached that point yet where you're going, and I just got to that point, and I had gone this month of July last year. The last call I had gone on, school was not in session yet, and we got called to a high school. The janitor was cleaning and ended up dying in the stall, cleaning the stall.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I show up first, and there's a young kid there who was also a janitor who found him, but he literally had talked to him like 30 minutes ago, and the guy was
Oh.
complaining about stomach aches, that he didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And the fire department came in, and they did their thing, and they pronounced him. And my biggest issue in Rhode Island, I don't know if it exists everywhere else, but I felt it was a problem, and I don't think it helped me. They changed the CPR law, which now they do 30 minutes uninterrupted CPR on scene. In the past, when somebody was recently deceased, they would whisk them away in the rescue, do CPR en route to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Now the idea is that CPR uninterrupted is supposedly supposed to work better. So
Oh, okay.
you're on a flat surface versus in the back of a
Mm-hmm.
rescue, it's bumpy,
Yeah.
and you're not getting a full compression or whatever. So now, regardless of where you are, this person could pass away in a football stadium, in the middle of family. The whole thing now is CPR right then and there, 30 minutes straight, and they time it on
Wow.
their phone. And when
Wow.
they're done, that's pretty much, they call the hospital, or if there's a paramedic on scene who's able to call it, and they call the hospital, say, yep, we did 30 minutes. We gave him all kind of injections, whatever. Nothing worked. Okay, call it time of death, and then they pronounce them there. And now the rescue picks up and they leave, and you're the police officer stuck with the grieving family member that is like, why aren't they taking my relative to the hospital?
Right.
And now you're like, well, this is the protocol now. Like, they did everything. You have to explain to them that they physically did everything they can medically do. But I know it's, as a family member, I still would be not okay with that. Like,
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
and you wonder what was the reasoning behind it. When they first came out behind us, we were like, well, does the hospital not want an overload of, the morgue? Or I don't know, because essentially
Yeah.
these people would get to the hospital and then they'd be pronounced dead at the hospital. So
Mm-hmm.
now, are they trying to save that
Yeah.
procedure? I don't know, but it was one of those things that, like, CPR is, I've done CPR on people, and I've never seen it work. And
Right.
I'm not saying it doesn't work, but, like, when I had talked to my psychiatrist about it one time, I was like, that was a big thing for me. And she also works on a hospital floor. So she was like, well, I've seen it work a million times. And I said, well, maybe that would have helped me at the time. But I said, because when I hear through the radio CPR in progress, or I have to do CPR, I'm like, my automatic thought is that person's gone,
Yeah.
you
Mine,
know?
mine too, actually.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a last ditch attempt
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to, and very rarely do they get a pulse back or whatever. And now the fact that they don't even bring you to the hospital anymore, it just, but so anyway, this guy, it ended up being a heart attack, but, like, or that's what the EMTs thought on scene. And they were just like, yeah, it's probably a heart attack. Like, oh yeah, sometimes you get stomach aches the night before and this and that. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, and then in my mind now, like, I'm having like a stomach ache, and then all of a sudden I'm like, am I gonna, like, it was so unhealthy. It was like,
Yeah. No, I get that.
and I was embarrassed even to tell people about it initially,
Yeah.
about what was going on. And then,
So,
oh,
so
go ahead,
the
sorry.
no, I don't want to override what you're saying. I'm just making sure that I keep up, and so the listeners keep up. So those that's 2016 is when you really started to feel like
Right.
physically and emotionally overwhelmed by the cumulative scenes that you were experiencing, and so you
Yeah.
were having obviously physical problems. So then what happened next?
Well,
What did
see,
you do about it?
the thing is, I mean, you know as well, or any cop out there is going to know, and this is the thing that I want to be a voice to help is you're afraid that if you say anything, even if it wasn't that bad back then, that maybe it could have been, but you're afraid if you go to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem looking at dead people," that they're going to take your badge and your gun away, and you're going to lose your job. And as somebody with a family and mortgages and things like that, like you don't know what to expect, and you don't know how you're going to be labeled or how they're going to take it. So, you just keep doing it because you
Hmm.
assume, well, I'll find my own way to deal with it. I'll try not to, my thing that I dealt with was I would try not to analyze the body, over analyze it when I would go on
Hmm.
a scene. I'd see it, I'd do what I had to do, but not spend too much time in there. Once I was done, I'd leave the room and stay outside the room and watch, instead of, as long as I could guard it until as a crime scene or whatever, until the ME could get there. But I didn't want to be in the room with the body, and there were things I was doing to try to
Hmm. Yeah,
distance myself from that.
that makes
So
sense.
I ended up, come July last year, that was after that guy with the janitor. About a few
Hmm.
weeks later, I was at work and I just had I guess you could call it a panic attack. I didn't even know what it was. I
Hmm.
was headed into the locker room and I felt like literally the walls were closing on me. I felt like I was suffocating. Like I didn't even, and I've never felt that before in my life. And I'm ignoring it because I'm thinking, what is this? Like, I'm just going to get dressed, put on my gear, go to roll call, and sit through roll call. And then, the sergeant's in roll call, and it's just like, I felt like I wanted to scream. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Like, help.
Yeah.
So I run out as soon as he's done. Most of the time we would stay and, chit chat and joke and, bust each other's beans in roll call. But I ran right out. I got my car loaded up, my cruiser, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get on, start my day, do it like I normally do. So I'm driving down the road and I'm really, really trying hard to ignore it. And then finally I'm like, I need to pull over. So I pull behind a school. The school was closed because school was out of session still in July. And I just pull over and start gasping like I can't breathe. And then, I look up to the sky and I say, towards God, I say, what is wrong with me? I'm crying at this point now and I can't control myself. So I call my wife and I'm like, and she's, obviously scared. She's like, what is going on? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, she's like, you need to come home. So I collected myself enough and I went up to the lieutenant and I sat at the desk and I was just like, look, I don't know what's going on. I said, I haven't been sleeping good. Um, I said, I feel like I'm literally falling apart. Like, I don't know. I'm saying, I'm sorry. I said, I was almost apologetic. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And he's like, well, maybe you should go home for the day, like take the day off, like, and I'm like, but like, I feel like I can get, like, if I just maybe sit for a little bit, I'm like, or have it like, maybe I'll calm down. Like, I don't know. And he's like, no, like, go home. So I did. And I went downstairs and I sat in the locker room for like another 30 minutes, just on the chair in there. Like, I just couldn't process what was going on, couldn't move, like, just so afraid. Like, I didn't know, and it just got worse. The next day, we ended up going to the ER, or the next day after that, or, my wife took me to the hospital because I was like literally a basket case. I felt like I was going to jump out of my skin. If I could jump out of my body, literally, I would have.
Wow.
I
Wow.
just couldn't settle, couldn't sit, so uncomfortable, agitated by the slightest noise, and it just,
Wow.
that carried on for a while. And I finally had to make the phone call to somebody at work because I took some time off, vacation days, thinking like I was going to just relax, get better. I
Yeah.
went to a doctor. They put me on, Zoloft to try to take the edge off, and it just wasn't helping. And, because I guess that's one of those things that needs to take like 6 to 8 weeks
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do any.
Like you feel
Right,
like you have 6 to 8 weeks. Oh my
right.
gosh.
So I called because the more I had thought that I was going back to work, the worse it was making me. Because here I am, not
Mm,
physically in a place like to go to work,
right.
and
Right.
I'm curled up in a ball, literally rocking on the bed in the morning because that was the only thing that gave me comfort. And then, I find myself saying, well, I need to tell them. because let's be realistic, I can't go back, and I need to let them
Mhm.
know something's wrong, and I'm gonna need, so I called a peer support person.
I was just
And
gonna ask you, did you guys have peer support on your department?
yes, we did. So they were in a transition period where it was the one person who was in charge. She had just passed off the role to, she was a sergeant to an officer. And I didn't realize that the role was being handed off to him. So I called her, but she was like, it sounds to me like you're having PTSD.
Mhm.
So that's before that, it never really clicked, that was what it might be. But she was like, are you willing to talk to somebody? Like, we have, so the town hires an agency that has clinicians,
Yeah.
and they work for the, not just the town, but the PD, and, they offer services for anxiety, different things like that. So,
Yeah.
I said yes. And I eventually did talk to her, and she's been great. I mean, her name's Becky, her first name, and that's up, but she's like an angel, you know what I mean? And I
And you're still seeing her?
yes, I still say, but now that I had moved and everything, like I haven't seen her, and then COVID kind of put a dent and everything.
Mhm.
So, but we had talked on the phone. She actually called me on my way down to Florida to check in on me, and like I said, she was that person that I met her every week for like the last year, and I would
Oh.
just talk, and I didn't realize all this stuff that came out,
Mhm.
and it was like stuff that I was burying. And I would tell Becky though, like sometimes I'm like, I would feel cathartic after I spend an hour and a half, 2 hours talking to you. But then later on at night, I can't sleep. I'm having nightmares because you dig it up.
Uh-huh.
And then, at one point I was like, look, I don't want to talk about stuff anymore. Like, but that's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's
Right,
essentially,
yeah. That's my
ta-
favorite kind.
right. It's essentially talking through things. So at one
Mhm.
point, I got to a point where I realized that I knew in my heart I couldn't go back.
Mhm.
And the doctor, we hadn't gotten there yet. And of course, a lot of these places want to get you back. That's their goal, is to get you
Mhm.
fixed and get you
Mhm.
back. But I saw that it was getting really bad, and I was starting to distance myself from anything law enforcement. I couldn't look at my
Mhm.
uniforms. I just, there was and I didn't realize, but when I started telling her these things, like I didn't realize that there were other cops that were going through the same thing and experienced the same exact things. The noise sensitivity. I'm like, my
Yeah.
kids, I'm like, kids are kids, but I'm
Yeah.
like, sometimes even like the happy laughter and stuff, I said I would get so agitated, and like it would like create like an anger in me, like, and it's
Mhm.
not right because that's not
Right.
me.
Yeah.
And I would say to my wife, like, I gotta go upstairs, I gotta be alone, I gotta put a pillow over my head so I don't hear
Mhm.
anything, you
Yeah.
know and it's a horrible way to live. And then on top of it, I kind of got the impression from the department, not peer support, and I always want to say that, specify that, like one guy I was dealing with, he was awesome, and he was kind of taking it on the chin for me from the department because they were confused, they didn't know what was happening, and they were kind of grilling him,
Yeah.
like, well, what's going on with him? When's he coming back? And he was just like trying to tell them and explain to them like he's entitled to his privacy and he's getting treatment, and they wanted to know everything, and I wasn't ready to talk about it yet, and I wasn't ready to talk to anybody yet besides him, and um, I just got the impression like I wasn't being helped, and eventually when the clinician said, this is PTSD, this is from work, she had given them a letter saying, look, he's in treatment indefinitely, and we're going to refer him to a psychiatrist type of thing. And we believe, it's work related. Well, it was a very vague letter. Well, they came back automatically and they denied any work
Workman's
compensation with
comp.
it. Right.
Mhm.
Denied, you know. And eventually I saw a psychiatrist and she diagnosed me fully with, completely work related, which we knew. I mean, I was in the military, but I didn't experience combat in the military. I never went overseas.
Right.
So you can't say that I got it from there,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I passed a psychological test when I became a cop. I never had any
Mhm.
mental health issues. So, and I knew exactly what it was from, that it was from the deceased bodies and the different things that was affecting me. And, what's weird about PTSD is that it just, so many other things it affects physically. Like, I didn't realize too that like my heart rate out of nowhere would go up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Uh-huh.
Suddenly, it would just
Yeah.
start like, and I didn't know what caused it. Like, I found that going up the stairs in my house, and not because I'm out of shape, just like if I ran up the flight of my stairs to my second floor, sometimes when I reached the top landing, I would get into like almost like, because we had a lot of tenant houses and things like that. And I really think what was happening, because I didn't make the connection right away, was my body's preparing. I'm heading up the stairs, even though I'm in my house. My body's thinking I'm going into a call, going into a domestic,
Mhm.
and my heart would start acting like really funny. So the way I would control it was I would have to consciously think happy. I used to happy
Yeah.
thoughts like Peter
Oh, yeah.
Pan while I'm walking
Yeah.
up the stairs,
Yeah.
and go
I get it.
slow.
I get it.
Right, go slow up the stairs, so I'm not like, because we all, you're home, your kids, you jog up the
Uh-huh.
stairs fast,
Yeah.
you're like, but then I would realize that, hey, don't do that, because your body is getting kicked off into some kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
So, I ended up having a heart monitor put on me for, 20, like 72 hours or whatever they put it on. And, there was nothing irregular what might be. It's not that, because it comes from the PTSD. It's just it would
Mhm.
raise and
Yeah.
lower, but the rhythm was fine, and but they wanted to double check to make sure nothing was going on. But the doctor knew it was from that. And he was like, it makes all sense. It all adds in together. But
So this whole time you're off work, you had to exhaust your sick leave, your
yeah,
vacation, you get CTO. I don't know if you guys get that. Everything was exhausted. And now where are you at? This is 2020, July
right.
2020. Where are you at?
So I haven't been paid since October of 20 last year. So
Okay. So you're
2019.
on unpaid leave right now.
Right.
You still work there. You're still an employee, but you're not being paid.
Right.
Well, that's because they can't fire you,
Right.
obviously.
Uh, right. I'm in a weird position right now
Yeah,
where,
that's very
so
strange.
about a few months ago, the doctor said to me that, the psychiatrist declared me basically permanently disabled.
Mhm.
So I had gone back to the town and said, like, I'm officially putting in my disability pension request
Oh,
for
okay.
retired, disability on duty,
Oh,
retired.
okay. Okay.
Well, prior to that, in October, when I exhausted my sick leave, paid leave, all that, and I had filed for OJI, as we call it, on the job injury, workman's comp. Our process as our police union was the town denied it, we grieved it, and now they set an arbitration date for, it was supposed to be June 11th for an arbitrator to hear both sides and make
Oh,
a
okay.
decision on whether it was job related.
Mhm.
And when I came to them and said, the doctor says not only is it job related, but I'm permanently disabled, they came back and said, denied, we're not giving you the pension. And we're going to see, basically, we're going to see you in court of whether this is even job related, because we don't believe it's even job related.
Wow.
So the last thing that I left it as was my attorney is telling me from the police union that they don't want to hear both cases the same time. So June 11th, because of COVID, was postponed. I'm supposed to go again
Mhm.
August 4th. But
Okay.
they don't want to hear, the town doesn't want the arbitrator to be able to rule on both cases,
Okay.
because they want to hear OJI first and then decide whether or not they're going to consider my disability pension. But the town essentially said, in like a roundabout way, like, even if he wins the on the job injury status, doesn't mean we concede to the disability.
Right. That makes
That'll
sense.
be another fight, which,
Uh-huh.
and I'm tired of fighting. What I mean? I shouldn't have to be
I
fighting,
hear you.
but
So that's where you're at right now, and that brought you to writing a book about it,
right,
correct? Okay.
correct.
We're going to take another super quick break, and we're going to talk about your book that's going to be super important for everyone to read. We'll be right back. Are you looking for Thin Blue Line gear? It's available on our website at thinbluelineforwomen.com. That's thinblueline4women.com. Show your support for law enforcement and get your Thin Blue Line gear today. Just click on shop at thinbluelineforwomen.com. Have you ever wondered what being a part of CSI is really like? If so, here's your chance to experience it. My book, titled Through My Eyes, CSI Memoirs That Haunt the Soul, contains 11 personal accounts of the most grueling and heartbreaking crime scenes I worked during my 15 years in the Crime Scene Investigations Unit. While reading my book, you'll walk inside the crime scene tape with me. You'll catch a glimpse of what I saw, touched, smelled, and even tasted during an average workday. I'll take you on a difficult journey of memories, uncovering layers of emotional trauma left behind. So if you're considering a job in CSI, this is the book for you. Or if you're just wondering what it's like to work in CSI, again, this is the book for you. Through My Eyes is available in the ebook format and paperback on Amazon. All right, we're back from break again. Now, Nick, tell us where this idea for this book came from. Obviously, it came from your experience, your post-traumatic stress experience, but tell us why the book and what your goal of writing it is.
Well, initially, when I started it actually was, I got to a point where I knew I wasn't going to come back. And I said, I don't want to forget about my law enforcement career. I want to kind of maybe write it down as a document so I have it if I want to look at it type thing and remember it. So it started that way. But before I did it, I was worried. I went to my psychiatrist and my clinician and I said, look, if I do this, do you think it's going to make me worse or better? Because I'm essentially going to be retelling stories, and she's like, no, like that's actually a form of therapy, is writing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I encourage you to do it. So I did. And as I'm starting to do it, I just kind of figured that, well, maybe I can make this a story about, look what happened to me, and draw awareness to it. So it became kind of one of those things. And, the other part of it too was at the time I was going through what I call a spiritual battle, because I felt like the PTSD was all spiritual as well. With I was being attacked, and I felt like a darkness was over me. And you still there? I just want to make sure I still have you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, all right. So, I started reading the Bible more, and I grew up Catholic, and I'd been what I used to call like a kind of like casual Christian. God was there, but he wasn't a big part of, as he should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started reading the Bible, because I was suffering and I wanted help and I was looking for help, and I wasn't getting it. The CBT is great, but it's not, at the end of the day, those memories aren't going to go away, and you got to live with it and learn how to manage it. So, I found so much in the Bible that was just like lines that were popping out to me and screaming out to me. And it was just like, I started integrating them into the book as I was talking about what was happening to me. And I started in the book talking about what we talked about earlier, like some of the history, how I became a cop. Like I had to start somewhere. And then I slowly get into things I had issues with being a police officer, moral issues that I found, like, because that bothered me as well, like, arresting people that I didn't think should have been arrested, or, my issues with traffic sometimes and how the system is set up. And, all this led to some of these crazy calls I went on that I think all contributed over the 12 years. And, as I'm doing it, I'm like, okay, I don't, sometimes you don't know who your audience is. You're like, is this a book for police officers? Is it a book for Christians? Is it a book for Christian police officers? Is it a book for people with PTSD? I don't,
Right.
But it's all of those things.
All of the above, yes.
Right, and I think other people can read it too. And especially what's going on right now at police, I think it's so important for people to read and see on like your book is titled Through My Eyes, like through our eyes.
Yeah, see what we've go through our eyes, yeah.
And that's the only way people are going to know. And, I was talking to, I'll give him a quick plug, Detective Locust last night till like midnight with PTSD help. And I'm going to work with him now. I'm going to be part of his org. And one of the things we said was, look, we came to the agreement, everything going on right now, we're like, some of these use of force issues, like we're not justifying or making excuses, but police mental health is such a big part of the problem. And we're not doing our police officers justice. We're not getting them the help we need. We're not letting them reach out. We're having a stigma about it, where our towns and our administrations are treating like they're treating me like he was treated, Detective Loke, like, and various other stories that I've heard, since going through this and opening up and coming to social media about it. So many people have come to me, you included, and I just, I felt so alone. But now I know there's other people out there, but yet it disgusts me at the same time that
you're not alone.
that all of us are going through this type of
Mm-hmm.
thing, and
Yeah.
we're all being treated the same. And maybe police reform also needs to be keeping on top of officers' mental health and checking in with them more often, even when they're not
Mm-hmm.
reporting things.
Yeah.
And if this guy in with the George Floyd case had all these disciplinary issues, like why wasn't a flag raised? Why wasn't maybe there was something going on with him? We don't know. I don't know. And again, not
Yeah.
making excuses, but
Yeah.
PTSD is such a bad thing, and it can
Yeah.
cause anger issues. It can cause and a lot of cops go back to work with it. They do.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what is the title of your book?
Okay, so the title of my book is Invisible Wounds: A Cop's Journey of Faith Through the Darkness of PTSD.
And you're
And
still writing it, correct? It's not finished?
it's finished,
Or it's
but
finished. Okay.
it's going through the official editing process.
Gotcha.
I had to hire an editor because
Uh-huh.
I let's face it, I'm a cop. You know,
Right, right.
I write police reports that were often handed back to me
Hey,
with
even great authors have editors. We
right.
all need editors.
I mean, if you saw some of I'm sure there was probably past supervisors that are now retired that I had that, one of them had a stamp for me, a red stamp that fixed this. And he would stamp my police
With your
reports
name
with
on
it.
it, Nick.
Right. So he would, if he found out I wrote a book, he'd be like, this kid can't write a police report. He is, right. So grammar wasn't my thing.
Right.
But,
So it's in the editing process now.
right. Yep.
Okay.
And
And
then
when is this book going to be for sale so we can all read it? Because I'm really
I
looking forward to it.
I am hoping sometime in August because it has to
Okay.
go through typeset next, and then actually I have to get it printed through a distributor, and which I have all that stuff lined up of who I'm going to use and stuff. And I don't know.
That's only next month.
Right. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm
Yay.
hoping summer, fall. We'll see.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I have my website, officernicholasanthony.com, so people can check that out too. And I
Okay.
have more information about me, the book. I have a prayer on there about like PTSD. I have resources pages where I believe yours is up there too. I put on there Detective Locus,
Oh, thank you.
cop line, like other people that they could reach out for, different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also go ahead, I'm sorry.
How is this book going to be available? Ebook, hardback, paperback?
It's gonna be paperback and ebook. Yeah.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
pulled up I serial numbers for a paperback and an ebook. And I'm hoping to do a massive distribution through like Ingram or something. So it'll be Amazon, it'll be Barnes and Noble online. Like you'll be able to get it pretty much anywhere.
How do people find you on social media? And say your website one more time as well.
It's so it's officernicholasanthony.com. And there's also the social media links to my Twitter account on there, and my Instagram account and my Facebook account as well. That's all the book account. Most of the time I go by my book account is PTSD Cop Book, but how Twitter, Instagram, and they all use different. Like some of them allow capitals, some of them have space, and like
right.
So I mean, I do have. I honestly have to look them up myself because. If they allowed it to be all the same, that's why I tried to keep it all PTSD Cop Book, but I had to do. I think Instagram doesn't allow uppercase letters. Maybe it's Instagram. So if you look up PTS Cop Book, you should be able to find it on Instagram. And then Twitter.
What's the name of your book? One more time.
Yep, Invisible Wounds: A Cop's Journey of Faith Through the Darkness of PTSD.
Okay. All right. Well,
and I feel like it was a journey because while I kind of wrote it while everything was going on, and my faith was kind of, and you can see as you get towards the end of the book, like I appear to be more strong and forceful in my faith of like I feel like I picked up momentum, and I got to be honest with you, like if I'm a firm believer in the Holy Spirit now, and I think that helped me write the book because I really do feel like someone like me who had never wrote a book before. I had people ask me, how did you do it? And I said, I don't know. I said, the book kind of wrote itself.
Yeah, no, I hear you. My book, this is not my interview. This is yours. But my book was born and created just from me telling the stories. And I read the same thing. My master's is in counseling, marriage and family therapy. And I had read that just writing things down uses a different part of your brain, and it's very therapeutic. So that's how I started. And I haven't been officially diagnosed with PTSD because actually I'm afraid to go
Right.
somewhere to, I don't want to hear those words.
Right.
I know that I have those moments, and I know that I deal with that. That's why I wrote the book, and I'm just going to leave it there because it's I don't
You
need to go
know,
any further.
I think a lot of police
But
do.
yeah,
You know?
I don't want to hear somebody diagnose me as that.
Right.
And
I
I don't,
understand.
and everyone has different symptoms and different, different. Well, I guess symptoms is the word. Like I've never had a quote unquote breakdown.
Right.
I don't like, it's not disrupting my life every day. I have a handle on it. I still have visions and things that happen, but I kind of have a handle on it, and I know how to calm myself down and tell
Right.
myself,
You
no,
know how
that's
to
not
manage it.
real.
Right.
I know how to manage it.
And
But
that's
I have a lot of tools too
and that's
to
what
use.
PTSD is. I mean, I learned
Yeah.
too that it becomes managing it
Yeah.
and
Right.
having
Well,
a
first
healthy life.
admitting that you have it, first admitting
Right.
that, oh, this is what it is, and own up to it, because a lot of people, well, like me, I mean, I'll say it on a podcast, but I don't want a doctor to tell me you have
Right.
PTSD. What's the difference?
Well, you
That's
know
so
what it is?
silly.
A lot of it is labeling and understanding, and like I said, I feel like even guys that I was on the job with that I was friends with, a lot of them, were intimidated to call me at first because they didn't know how I was, but after they
Yeah.
talked to me for an hour and a half on the phone and
Yeah.
realize I'm still the same Nick,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and they
Right.
feel better about it. Like, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of them are thinking like, well, he's out with PTSD, he's crazy or something like, you know what I mean? Like,
Crazy. That's the word.
you
That's the
know,
stigma that everybody gets. Oh, he's
and
a
it
crazy
is.
person. Yeah.
And it's real quick. I went through, as a
Yeah.
responder, I was, I forgot to mention, I was an elderly affairs advocate too when I left, the senior officer dealing with the elderly people. And, one of the things I did was go to a mental health first aid class. And one of the exercises they have you do is come up with labels of
Oh
when you
gosh.
hear somebody has mental health. What do you
Yeah.
hear? In
Yeah.
inappropriate labels. What are these words that are tossed out?
Right.
And,
Crazy.
crazy, lunatic, or,
5150.
psycho, all these things that, like,
Yeah.
and it's funny because mental health can be, a stigma in general, and PTSD is a form of mental health, but you're not that guy that's on your, you think people think PTSD, you're on your rooftop with a sniper rifle, like,
Right. Yeah.
waiting for
Yeah.
something to happen. Like, it's
Yeah.
not the case,
Right.
especially, and it's been I guess publicized in Hollywood and
Yeah. Right.
dramatized a certain way too,
Yeah.
that it's shell shock and that the guy that came back from war now is gonna freak out and start like slashing people's throats in the middle of like
Yeah.
so because he thinks he's in the middle of combat. It's
Right.
they don't. There's a lot of non understanding with it. With
Right.
even with veterans and it's
Yeah.
not just police either. It's firemen, it's
Yeah. Oh
dispatchers.
yeah. Oh
You know,
yeah. Big time. They're the
there's
first ones to get the call, for crying out loud.
yeah,
The very first line of defense. Yeah.
nurses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People don't
Oh
think. I
yeah.
mean, doctors. These are people that, and it's not just a problem even with police because I know, my doctor was telling me like she's had nurses come to her that, and they same thing. The hospital doesn't want to help them, and it's like
Yeah.
there's all these people out there, especially any first responder. You see these things that the normal person doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
frequency of seeing.
Yeah.
I read an
Exactly.
article once that said that an average person might experience like one or two traumas through their entire life, where a first responder, it could be like 900 plus, like
Yeah.
something
It's
insane,
crazy.
you
I think we
know?
read the same article. I just read that about a month ago. I know.
Yeah. And I think I referenced it in my book. I do have it in my book, I
Yeah.
believe. I'm not sure, but
Crazy. And if I have to hear one more time, well, you signed up for that job.
right. And that's such a,
Oh my gosh.
but and that's the
I hate.
thing. Like even the insurance companies that for the towns, they tend to use that as an excuse. Well, you knew that that was an inherent, as in your job description that you were going to be exposed to X, Y, Z, and blah blah blah. I'm like, well, right,
What
but
What's so funny is, okay, if I'm at work and I get into an altercation with a suspect and I break my arm, they're going to pay for that. But I knew that going in, I knew there was a possibility of getting hurt physically on the job, right?
right,
But they still
right,
paid for that. So
right.
what is the difference?
What is the difference?
The difference is we have to have a voice, and we have to keep having a voice and get this done.
Right. And
And it
I
starts
think
with,
it needs to be beyond the state level too, because I
yeah,
know they are
right.
trying to pass it in Rhode Island on the state
Yeah,
level, but it's held for study and it could be years
yeah,
out.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it needs to come, I think, from the federal level of, and I think it was a good step recently that we saw the FOP just posted that, the White House did suicide prevention. There was a bill passed for police for suicide tracking or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it's got to start that way.
Yeah.
And it's got to, this mental health thing with police, it's
Yeah.
especially now, people are over, like these cops right now are even worse. So if you had
Oh,
PTSD and you're actively on the job right now, it's probably even worse.
Oh, I bet.
Going through
Well,
what they're going through.
Nick, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and talking about what you went through, because I know that was hard, difficult to talk about. I look forward to your book. So get on his website, follow him on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you have. And one more time, how do they get a hold of you on social media? PTSD Cop Book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually it's
Okay.
in that form of, I think Twitter it might have under like the underscore.
Yeah, the underscore. Well, that way we know when your book's coming out and we can all grab it, because we need to support you and we all need to support each other. So Nick, thank you very much for your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you. And you as well.
Thank you. If you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, you don't have to be alone. You can make a confidential, safe call now at this phone number, 206-459-3020. Safe Call Now is a confidential 24-hour crisis referral service for all public safety employees, all emergency services personnel, and their families. Again, the number is 206-459-3020. You can also call Copline at 1-800-267-5463. If you're not a first responder, you can reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. You don't have to be alone.